if I evict someone, they're on the streets, right? There is nowhere for them to go. And in Phoenix, with the market as hot as it is, no landlord has to rent to a person that has an eviction.
Welcome to Trial to Triumph, hosted by Caleb Johnson, the show about leaning into life's constant testing on your way to realizing your biggest blessings.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Caleb Johnson, host of From Trial to Triumph, and today I am very excited for our guest. He started investing in real estate when his friend needed a place to rent, and since then he has scaled to up to 200 units, and he currently self-manages his rental units as well as holds a W-2 job all at the same time. So Jose, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Caleb. It's great to be here.
Yeah. And Jose, can you just give our audience a quick synopsis of your background and how you got started?
So I wanted to make a clarification real quick. I only manage the 12 units that I own here personally in Phoenix. So the investments that I do and the partnerships that I have are throughout the country and other states like Texas and Georgia. So I'm only managing those 12, because I don't think I could personally manage 200 units. That would actually be that's a huge endeavor. But to answer your question, so I got started because a friend of mine had gone through a pretty bad divorce, and her now ex-husband had completely destroyed both of their credits. Had left them kind of in a state where they were nearing bankruptcy. She still had a job, so at least she had that going for her, but she was completely unable to rent an apartment. And so she and I had been talking or whatever. Actually, I let her stay with me for probably a month or two while she was just trying to get back on her feet, because that can be difficult. So we had talked a little bit about how I had wanted to start investing in real estate, and she needed a place to stay and was unable to find anything. So we actually went out together and started looking at condos, and it was a great experience for me because I learned a lot about what a female wants as opposed to what a male wants. So for me, I wanted certain things and she wanted other things. For example, in-unit washer and dryer was an absolute must. And for me, it wasn't something that I'd even cared about. So we found a place that worked out money-wise, and for both of us, I gave her a huge discount on the rent because I was using the opportunity to learn, and that's how it started.
Wow. Okay. I don't think many investors have taken the time to search for properties with their potential renters, but of course that dynamic changed when it's your friend. What were some things you've learned from that experience in particular? Now, renting, I've heard a lot of people talk about you don't want to work with friends and family. It just causes a lot more potential for uncomfortable moments around Thanksgiving, right?
Right.
What did you learn from that process?
So it's funny. So she and I had a really great relationship, but I will tell you that she stayed there for 6 years, and I eventually raised the rent, I think after maybe 4.5 years, and I didn't raise the rent, and actually I thought that might be the end of our friendship. And it was funny because I hadn't raised the rent at all, and I'd even given her a discount up front, and she knew that. And I think once it all settled, it was fine. But although I haven't had that personal experience, I know some people that have rented to friends and family and has destroyed their relationships. They take advantage of them because they think that they could. There's expectations as far as what people deserve, what you should do for them, etc. So what I do is I make sure that everything is spelled out completely. I've written, borrowed money from my brothers, lent money to my brothers, and there's almost always a contract involved. We do a contract just to be clear, and I tell people the contract isn't so that I can go to a lawyer and enforce it and sue them. The contract is merely so that they and we're both clear on what the expectations are.
Right. I think that's a good point, and I've heard so many horror stories where people don't get a contract, and it's like you said, you don't want to take it to court to have leverage or anything like that. It's just more so you and I are on the same, or you and them are on the same wavelength, and it's spelled out. You go over it, and it's not, oh, now you owe me money, and you don't want to get into that, right?
Exactly.
So after that first property, you obviously didn't stop there. So can you tell me how your real estate career progressed after that?
Certainly. So what I did was I bought another single-family rental and started to grow the single-family properties that I have out here in the Phoenix area. And most recently, I purchased a 10-unit property in Phoenix, which was, I say it was sort of by accident because I wasn't looking for a 10-unit property. It turned out that I was looking for something more just to get into small multifamily, like a 3-unit or a 4-unit, because the laws are different. Anyway, found this 10-unit, ended up realizing how difficult multifamily can be. And so I started looking for resources. But during that time, I ended up purchasing the 10-unit by myself. I self-manage it. It's in a Class D neighborhood, and what that means is that there's crime in the area. And I'll just be very blunt. I can point you to where the drug dealer is. I can point you to where there's some ladies of the evening that live nearby. I can tell you where they live. Regularly, the tenants get notices for sex offenders that live in the area. So that's the type of neighborhood that it is. But it's not violent. I don't have a personal issue with walking around the neighborhood at night. However, I am on guard, of course. So anyway, to answer I'm digressing quite a bit. But so what I started to do was I invested in that 10-unit. It allows me the opportunity to rent to whoever I want. But also, in order to learn more, I started investing with some partners. So as a partner, I'm investing in other multifamily opportunities so that I can learn the business, understand how things work, become better at asset management, which is the thing that I really enjoy doing. I like the interaction with the tenants. I enjoy making sure that the property runs, well, correctly or properly, that everybody's happy, things like that. Even though everybody won't be happy, that's the goal, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's talk about that, investing in a D-class area a little bit, because the first property I actually bought was in a suburb of Mesa, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix. So I invested in a fourplex in Apache Junction, which was probably in a C-, but it was gentrifying into a C and a C+. And I could tell you too, I inherited 3 tenants, and I lived in 1 unit. But behind me lived the hoarder it was a 2-bed, 1-bath, and there were 7 people living in it with roaches and mice as the other tenants that weren't paying rent. And the drug dealer lived next door to them. And like you said, sometimes it can be stressful. You're on guard. You are and you aren't, and you still want to be respectful to them. But how do you manage that class of property? Is there certain software or anything in particular?
So for me, I use a piece of software called Stessa. It's a free software. The way I explain it to people is it's like a Quicken. It's just that it's specifically for real estate and rental property. So there aren't 800 categories of how you classify an expenditure. So I do that in-house, and then at home, I guess, in my house. And I do a lot of the maintenance myself. So there are some things that I don't do. I don't do detailed plumbing. I don't replace water heaters necessarily, because it's a lot of effort to go buy one, install it, get rid of the old one. And for some people, they do it. I don't do I don't cut counters and major rehabs. I don't do those sorts of things. But a lot of the day-to-day stuff, or the things that come up every couple weeks or every few months, I'm able to handle myself, or utilize a handyman that I have that I use periodically, for some of the larger jobs. But yeah, sorry, that's kind of how I manage it. But I think the thing that I really enjoy is that I have this positive relationship with the tenants, and the goal is and I tell them up front. I said my goal is to provide you with a clean, safe, and stable environment. And I want someone that wants to live in a clean, safe, and stable environment. So just like we talked about getting involved with friends and family, I set expectations up front, and I'm very clear about what those expectations are. And I have, believe it or not, had tenants refuse to apply or choose to not apply because I talk to everybody before they apply, and I explain to them what the expectations are, and I explain to them that people have to get along. I'm a big fan of tenant rights. I'm a big fan of peaceful and quiet enjoyment, right, which is a legal right for tenants, and I enforce that. And some people, they don't like that, and I'm okay with that. And I tell them, so a lot of people actually self-select their way out once we talk about what the expectations are.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something that a lot of people don't take into account, where if you are upfront with people, then, and you're honest and you set that expectation, then mostly you would hope the majority would respect that. And sometimes, you'll have a bad apple that doesn't, but most of the time you say that, like, they will self-select. And what are some things that you have dealt with in that area that another person might not, let's say a B-class neighborhood, they would not experience in a better part of town?
Well, I've dealt with bed bugs a couple times. I've dealt with, and so dealing with bed bugs is funny because there's a very specific set of steps that need to happen when you have a bed bug infestation in a unit, whether that be a house or an apartment complex. And the tenant is required by law to comply. So again, I'm a big fan of tenant rights. I tell them, so as a landlord, it is my legal responsibility to remediate the issue, basically to remove the bed bugs, to do whatever I have to in order to make sure that happens. It is a tenant's obligation, however, to basically help me do that by picking up all their clothes, by putting them in bags, by moving furniture away from the wall so the pest fellow can come through. And then in the end, depending on whose fault it is, if the tenant introduced the bed bugs into the unit, then they are also required by law to pay, of course, and that's a different matter altogether. But I had one tenant where we would go in and spray, but he wouldn't clean up properly. And then he had an infestation, and we believed that it was done, and then it came back. And it was partly because he was allowing a homeless person that lived next door to come into his property. And I say that we traced it to that because it turned out in the 10 units, 3 of them had bed bugs. And there was one fellow that went between those 3. It was an ex-tenant. And so we kind of traced it to them, and we were able to remediate the issue on 2 of the units. But the 3rd unit, he just couldn't get it together. And so we dealt with this for months, on and off. Now, I know a lot of people would say, hey, let's just kind of, this was a tenant that I'd inherited. He was on housing assistance, so the rent was being paid. And I wanted to cut him a break. And the reason why I wanted to cut him a break and work with him was because if I evict someone, they're on the streets, right? There is nowhere for them to go. And in Phoenix, with the market as hot as it is, no landlord has to rent to a person that has an eviction, because there's so many other tenants that are qualified, we'll say. So we worked with him for a while. Eventually, his lease, I threatened him with the eviction. We got to a point where his lease expired, and I said, look, we can do this one of 2 ways. I can either evict you and forcibly remove you from the unit. I said, in which case the eviction will go on your record and you'll never be able to rent again. I said, or you just clean up your stuff, get everything out that you need to, hand me the keys, and walk out the door. And a lot of people, again, want to go through the eviction process. So cost me, he stayed like 4 days after his lease. But what people don't understand is that I would have had to go in and clean up all of his stuff, right? It's complete bedbug infestation. Clean up all of his belongings. I would have to store all of his belongings for 14 days as required by law. And then I would have to make arrangements for basically him to come pick them up and to deal with all these things and clean everything out. Whereas I gave him a couple extra days, he cleaned this place like incredibly well. I mean, I couldn't believe how clean the place was. Now, it wasn't move-in ready clean, but it was, he picked up all of his stuff. He took all of his clothes, he packed everything up, he put everything in bags, he cleaned, and then everything that was left, once he handed me the keys, went straight into the garbage, right? And I can do that as opposed to storing miscellaneous garbage for 14 days, and I have to pay for that, I have to make arrangements for that. And yes, I can go after the tenant for that cost, but he was on housing assistance. I mean, where's he going to get $100 to pay for storage, right? It just wasn't going to happen. So that would be one thing that I think I'd run into. I've run into where, I have people park in my parking lot that are doing drug deals with the fellow next door. So I've dealt with trespassers, people jumping the fence because we have a gated property. I try to have a real positive working relationship with Phoenix police. But there are things like, as an example, where if someone will park into my lot and I have it on camera because I've installed cameras, and the neighbor will come by, lean inside the car, they'll talk for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, something happens, that guy walks away, car drives away. Right? This is a recurring thing. And, there's no way to stop this for us, right? Because I'm not on site all the time. Phoenix police does not respond that quickly. And if they do respond, they just drive by, and these guys are they're just talking, right? So it's, yeah. And it's funny you say that. These things that I'm talking about, these things do occur in Class A and Class B properties. They may not just occur as much. People don't talk about them. I would challenge you to find somebody in a Class B property that basically admitted that they had a tenant with bed bugs, right? They would never be able to rent that place out, whereas I can. And I can say, well, look, we had it. I'm legally required to tell you that we had it, an infestation. It's been certified by someone that can basically certify it as bed bug free, and that's... Yeah, it's interesting. All the different classes are funny that way.
Mm-hmm. I would even think that if I was a tenant and you as a landlord presented me with a document that said this place had bed bugs and now it's bed bug free, that would almost make me feel confident because I know you aren't lying to me. And you straight up told me, hey, this is what's going on. It's clean. Here's the documents that prove that, and that would almost make me feel more secure in renting that you aren't hiding anything. So,
right,
that's great. And I've had to experience the even cash for keys is what they call it, where you pay the tenant $100 to get out, and it's hey, if you get out within a week, I'm not going to evict you, and so that's on your permanent record. I think you even went a step further and the better route, which is you didn't offer to pay him, or you might have, but you didn't end up paying him. And that I think that's a good alternative where they're also incentivized to not have an eviction on their record, right?
Right. And some people have done. Some people have been successful with it. I haven't had a need to do it. Leases run out over time, and usually I would just kind of work with people to, so they can find a place. So, but yeah, cash for keys does work for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Now, investing in that part of town, have you thought about? Has that skewed your thoughts on investing in an area that's like that, or would you continue to do that?
So I would love to continue to buy in this area, actually, because. And my goal is to house more people, not to buy a Class D property, kick out all the tenants just so I can raise the rents and put in new tenants. It doesn't make sense to me because the job the job. But the goal here is to house more people, and booting people, doesn't solve that problem. However, there are a couple assets in this neighborhood that are boarded up, that are vacant. I'd still like to buy in that area and clean the places up, provide housing to people that need it. So it hasn't dissuaded me. However, I will tell you that it's also, I'm willing to do that because I can self-manage it. If you hire a property management company, they're not going to take the time to talk to tenants. They're not going to take the time to understand them, I think, the way that I will. At least I haven't found one that will. And so if I were going to, as I mentioned, I do investments in other parts of the country, even other parts of Phoenix with partners. If there was an asset, say, in a bad part of Dallas or something, I would be less inclined to invest in that area because I know the property management's going to come in and they're going to potentially raise the rents and start kicking people out. And that's not really the goal. If you're doing drugs, if you are selling drugs especially, that's huge. If you're walking around threatening people, if you've chosen to live in a way that violates the quiet and peaceful enjoyment of the other tenants, absolutely, you get out. I want these people out as quickly as possible, because allowing, where one person's rights ends, where you start violating other people's rights. So if you're playing your radio at 3 a.m. and keeping all the neighbors up, well, that's not cool.
Right. I think that's a good perspective. And also having a day job is something that I think we've all experienced, maybe not, but most of us have experienced getting into real estate, where you'll have a part-time gig that's flipping, or you have a couple rentals that you manage yourself, and you're also working your W-2 at the same time. What's been the biggest thing that you've learned as a work life, I guess, a real estate business and a day job? How do you manage those two together?
So I'm very fortunate that, I'll be honest with you, I think this is one of the silver linings of COVID, right, was that a lot of companies allowed, if the opportunity presented itself, it allowed them to start working from home. And so it really opens the door for flexibility in my day. I also learned that even though I never have to travel for work, I do have to travel for work once in a while now. And once that happens, it will usually be when I need to be in town to deal with some tenant or some major issue. So that kind of works, works like that. But I think COVID really helped me out a lot, because I don't have to report into the office anymore. I do have meetings, but most of the tenants, again, when you have a positive relationship with them and a working relationship, they understand that, everything doesn't have to happen on their schedule. Some of them do, but some people don't. So I think it boils down to, again, expectations and tenant screening, right? So, and when I say tenant screening, I'm talking about people. I'm not talking about actions. I've got, I've rented to people that were, that had, or I guess they used to be addicted to drugs, in and out of mental institutions. A fellow that has a violent felony. We sit down, we talk about it a little bit. Understand what kind of person they are and how these things happen, because we're really only, most of us, even though we don't like to admit it, we're only one misunderstanding and one mistake away from effectively being in jail, right? I mean, it doesn't take much. I mean, it takes a bit, and some people are prone to putting themselves in situations where these opportunities, we'll call them, occur more often. But for most of us, it's, you get pulled over, police officer has a bad day, there's something he doesn't like, maybe he finds something, and then all of a sudden now you've got a problem, and next thing you know, you have something on your record that you just can't even believe, and it will affect your ability to get a job, your ability to get an apartment, your ability to get a loan, and I just think these things happen to good people.
Yeah,
So anyway,
I think you're absolutely right there. And you that leads us into a good point. Is how do you screen your tenants for these for your rentals?
So what I do is so there's a lot of, I would encourage everybody that's interested in renting out a piece of property, unless it's in your own home, because the housing laws change. If it is in your own personal, your primary residence, understand that you have to be as uniform as possible. So the way we do this is we have a questionnaire, and that questionnaire everybody fills out initially. And then what we do is we have a conversation and say, look, if there's something on your questionnaire that you think might look bad, if there's something that will come up in your credit report or your background check that you think might look bad, this is an opportunity to tell me, to explain it. Okay. And I start out with that, and I say, because if I see something on your background check, and we'll see something that you don't think we're going to see, well, at that instant in time, we can reject you because you falsified your application, or you lied on your application, or whatever. And so we can reject those people right away. So what I do is I tell people this up front, and by doing so, they become extremely honest and forthcoming. And so right off the bat, we establish a relationship of trust and respect and communication. And so the people that don't want to do that, again, they're self-selecting. I've had people tell me, well, no, I'm not going to apply. I just don't even want to, because they've made a decision that that's not the environment that they want to live in. And this isn't an intrusive thing. I'm not saying there has to be this, oh, well, you have to respect me because I'm the big, landlord. It's like, we just need to respect each other as people, and that we're in a business relationship, or even a, not too personal relationship, but that people tell me how they're doing, how their jobs are going, and whatever. So I think connecting with people is a big part of tenant screening. But of course you have to be careful, because there are an incredibly large number of questions that you can ask somebody that you think aren't offensive. But if somebody believes that the answer to that question could allow you to be biased for or against a particular tenant. One example is, I had a tenant that applied, and her English was not her first language. Very clear, not a big deal for me. I asked her, because I was looking for translators, right? I wanted to get a translator, and I said, "Oh, what's your native language?" And that is a question that will now, fortunately, because of didn't understand contract law, she was in a lease that didn't expire for 6 more months, and so she couldn't move in. So, but asking that question, and I'm okay admitting it, right? But asking that question actually could have put me in danger of violating fair housing laws. Because now I can ask something like, well, I'm thinking of getting a translator. Is there a preferred language that you might have? Right? Or can you bring a family member to translate for us, because we really were not communicating much at all, which is why we didn't learn this thing about her lease not expiring. And so, be honest, be consistent, right, with people, be upfront with them, and then establish that sort of relationship. That's pretty much the screening process. And I meet every tenant prior to them applying.
That's good. I think I didn't know about that in regards to the fair housing law. And where do you think people is that really, people just have to go through that process to learn things like that? Or is there a faster route to learn that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I started, you can go look up the fair housing laws. Of course, they're posted in a bunch of different places. The real, I think, thing to Google is to Google questions your landlord can't ask, or something along those lines, right? Because it will say, oh, if you ask this question in this way, it violates fair housing because it provides information about someone's background. As an example, you stated that different people have stated things like how they spend their weekends. Oh, I spend time with my family, and I do these things. And Do you go to church? Right. Okay. Something as simple as that, and you can run into problems if you turn them down. They can just say, "Well, look, you're biased against me, right? Because you don't like the religion that I practice." It's really interesting. Yeah, you have to be careful. And most tenants don't care about these sorts of things, but there are some what we call professional tenants, and they're looking for mom and pop landlords to slip. And if they slip, guess what? Then the tenant doesn't have to pay, because they don't have to pay rent because you violated their basic rights, right? Protected rights. They're a protected class. You've done this, so you have to be careful. I haven't done a search. I'll just tell you very quickly that I've been told that there are websites out there if you want to learn how to be a professional tenant.
Wow. And I think that's a good point. If you want to get ahead of that, Googling for those websites, or Googling what my landlord can't say to me. I wouldn't have never thought about that, and I think that's great. And Jose, I really think it's great that you are providing this service to these tenants in an unfortunate situation, because a lot of people don't. So I think that's great. And I think we're just about out of time, so I'll ask you 3 brief questions. If you can recommend one book to our listeners, what would it be?
Yeah, so it's funny because obviously a lot of people talk about books. So the book I would recommend, I think, is going to be one I just read. It's by Chris Voss, called Never Split the Difference. And I will tell you that I hesitated reading this book because it sounded like a way to get over the person that you're negotiating with. And it turns out the book is really about listening better to the person that you're negotiating with. And in doing so, you can meet their needs a lot better. So that's what I got from the book. I'm sure some people will get different things. But yeah, Never Split the Difference. It's by Chris Voss.
Great book. Yeah, negotiating, that's awesome. Where can people learn more about you or get in touch?
So I just actually starting to get my website together, but the best way to get in touch with me would be via email. My email is very simply jose@geocentricinvestments.com. And that's geocentric is it's a satellite term that I like. So
okay. And we can put that in the show notes. And Jose, if there was one piece of advice that you could give to our listeners to take away from today, what would it be?
So I've thought about lately all the mistakes I've made over time, and the biggest mistakes that I've made, especially with real estate, are not evaluating and acting fast enough. And what I mean by that is that I bought the condo for my friend, and there were 3 condos actually in the same complex that we were looking at, and I didn't realize that all of them would appreciate as much as they would have. I didn't realize that the rent would appreciate as much as it would have. So what I would suggest is I only bought one, and I should have looked at that, and 2, 3, 4 months later said, wait a minute, this actually model works, and then bought the next one, and then bought 2 more. And that was probably my first biggest mistake in real estate. So evaluate quicker and then act based on that information, as opposed to just sitting on things and kind of letting them kind of play
Sometimes you just need to take action. It is you do have to ponder and think about what's the best way to do it, but the best time to buy real estate was yesterday, right? So, exactly, well, Jose, we really appreciated you joining us today, and everyone listening in, thanks for tuning in, and we'll be in touch soon.
It's time to grab your victory. Find us on the web at redseacapitalgroup.com and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Red Sea Capital Group.